Hello everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent, and today we are continuing to analyze the left's fixation on Trump's rhetoric and the way that that enables them to compare him to Nazis. If you watched yesterday's video where we dug into Snopes and we dug into some of the detail around Donald Trump's rhetoric, in particular relating to the term poisoning the blood of our country, I made one point in regards to the way Snope chose to headline their article. And their headline was, "Did Trump echo Hitler in using this rhetoric?" That was the headline. And I would say their conclusion is inconclusive, but probably not, is basically how they wrapped up their article. So you may recall that I pointed out in that video that headline could be quoted and could be used, that verbiage could be picked up and carry the ball forward. And in this way, the left is able to launder certain ideas and give them credibility through repetition as they bounce the idea and the language back and forth from one outlet to another. So today, surprise, shocking, headlining Reddit, Trump echoes Hitler. So yesterday, Snopes has an article, "Did Trump echo Hitler?" Today, Salon states it as fact. We went from theory to fact. Hey, we told the future. Trump echoes Hitler and MAGA hears it loud and clear. And now we get to jump right into the mind-reading portion of today's article, in which the author puts words and thoughts into Donald Trump's mouth and mind. Donald Trump believes in eugenics. He really does. Of course, his understanding of it is purely based on his own belief in his superior genes and good German blood. He's said it many, many times. And there's a super clip here, a minute and a half of him a bunch of times out of context, basically saying, blood is important, genetics are important, I'm amazing, look at me, I'm amazing. I don't feel like I should have to say this, but I'm gonna go ahead and say this. Words have meanings. You thinking you're awesome, or even you thinking you're awesome because of your genetic makeup from a particular country, is not eugenics. Eugenics is the study, the belief that you can actually shape the gene pool of the human race and improve the human race by culling defective people out of the herd, like breeding stock in livestock, grabbing different traits and breeding for that to achieve a certain selective process that's more effective than naturally selecting for reproduction through the human population, the old-fashioned way. It is necessarily a dominating, tyrannical, way out of line overreach of government busybodies saying, we're going to use the power of the state to shape the bloodline of a population of our country, whatever. That's what eugenics means. That's not at all what Trump says in that clip. But, I guess words are flexible. When he said during his first term he didn't understand why the U.S. allowed people from shithole countries to emigrate to the U.S. and suggested we should encourage people from Norway to come instead, it wasn't hard to figure out what he meant by that. Well, that's not a very fair characterization of his point, but, we're in dreamland, so sure, why not? His xenophobia never applied to white European immigrants. After all, he married 2 of them. They are the mothers of 4 of his 5 children. His problem is with the people of different races. If someone of a different race expresses devotion to him, then of course he likes them. Think of Kim Jong-un, of course, because of everyone who might be of a different race who said positive things about Donald Trump. Let's go to a North Korean dictator. That's definitely the most representative of this person. Trump's out campaigning in earnest as the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary are just weeks away. And if anyone thought he was going to soft pedal the Hitler-esque rhetoric, they were way off base. His basic stump speech is all about banning immigration by those who don't share our ideology. Whatever he means by that. Here's something simple. We used to encourage people to immigrate to the United States who wanted to become Americans, who wanted to obey American law, who wanted to take part in the American experience, who wanted to abide by capitalist principles. This is not rocket science, okay? You can wrap all those disparate ideas together into a coherent worldview, and guess what you call that? You call that an ideology. So, should we, as a country, encourage people to emigrate here who want to partake of our culture, who want to follow our laws, who want to do what we do and make us better by doing it? Yes, we do. That's what Donald Trump is saying. That's not Hitleresque. That's sound policy. But sure, let's go ahead and tweak it, throw in some scare quotes, and make it seem as scary as possible. Rounding people up here in the US and putting them in camps. Oh no, just random people? Or maybe criminals. Yeah, well, let's go with criminals. Maybe we should go ahead and enforce the laws that are on the books and actually have people here who want to be here, who want to follow our laws, who want to produce and contribute to the economy, who want to support the American ideals we used to espouse. And if you are here illegally, you should not be here. That's sound policy. How is that crazy? But sure, call it rounding up people in the US and putting them in camps. We're going to come back to that video link in just a second because I want to just show the sleight of hand. But let's go on a little bit with the rhetoric as go along. This blood poisoning rhetoric is literally right out of Hitler's manifesto. Yeah, if you Control F, you can find some similar language. But that doesn't mean they mean the same thing. That doesn't mean they have the same aims. That doesn't mean they enact the same policy. And I can prove it. Donald Trump was president. And while president, he wasn't Hitler. Not even close. Not even in the same universe. But that's what they're saying. They're saying if he gets in power, he's going to be a dictator. He's going to be Hitler. He wasn't the last time he was in power. He left at the end of his term. You are aware of that, right? Whatever. But it's right out of the manifesto. Words are scary. Okay. Including, and Trump wants just white people, which is funny because he's really popular with black people. Whatever. Okay, it's a big applause line. He knows it's working. It's tempting to believe that Trump doesn't actually know that he's parroting Adolf Hitler, as the White House charged after his latest tribute to the monstrous genocidal maniac. Okay, can you go with me on this? Can two things be true at once? Hitler is a terrible person, and Donald Trump is not Hitler. Can we have those two things? Can Donald Trump express a thought, and you actually take it seriously and look at what he means and say, oh, you're right. No, that's not at all what the, monstrous genocidal maniac meant. Whatever. And of course, let's cast aspersions. Stephen Miller, speechwriter, I'm assuming, who wrote the words of certain speeches, is characterized as Trump's personal Heinrich Himmler. But that's not an ad hominem, is that? That's not out of bounds. No, if you're in Trump's orbit, then you're automatically evil. Okay, fascist sentiments, underlying poisoning the blood of the country. Again, we got to call him fascist. The big message for today is simply this. One, the idea of laundering messaging from one outlet to another and giving it credibility out of whole cloth, things that are created out of whole cloth. Giving it credibility by repetition and repetition across multiple sources gives the sense of a coherent narrative and gives the sense of reality to something that isn't real. And in this is proved, by the way, the two headlines I just showed you. First, Snopes says, did he do this? And then that is converted in this headline to, he did it. I'm going to read this paragraph and then I'm going to debunk it. But I'm not going to dig into the video because we have a video example that we're going to get into in a second because they do the same trick more than once in this article. Recall that one of the biggest controversies of his first 2 years came about because of his response to the protest march in Charlottesville, Virginia. A group of alt-right men dressed in a sort of uniform of white polo shirts and khaki pants, had gathered one night to protest the removal of a Confederate statue. They marched around with tiki torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and "blood and soil," which seemed extreme, even for the Trump years. I'm going to go ahead and go with you and say that is extreme, which is why this is an outlier, which is why these people, you can't identify them with a political party or an organized group of people that believe and chant these things, because they are nutters on the fringe of the polity. There are crazy people out there. Some of them are going to get involved in politics. Sometimes you get a small collection of them put together. But you are calling out these people for being crazy, but you want to tie them to Trump. So here's how you do that. At a counter protest the next day, one of the alt-right protesters drove through a crowd, killing a woman, Heather Heyer. A tragedy. That shouldn't happen. Please don't drive your cars through crowds. Bad idea. Trump was irritated that the neo-Nazi group was being blamed for what happened and famously declared that there were good people on both sides, suggesting that not all Nazis are bad people. Again, going into the mind reading. You know what? I am going to pull this video quote because video is more persuasive than my opinion. So this is their characterization. A bunch of crazy white people with tiki torches chanting, "Jews will not replace us." One of them runs over a very unfortunate counter-protester who gets killed. And Donald Trump's response is to say, good people on both sides. In other words, I don't want to take a moral stance. I just think there was good people on both sides. Not all Nazis are bad people. That's how this has been characterized. Now, watch me pull a rabbit out of the hat.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Kill the person. Heather Heyer
Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville to protest. They put themselves down as you. And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
I'm not talking about neo-Nazis and white supremacists. They should be condemned totally. That seems pretty clear. Now, let's go back to the characterization. There were good people on both sides, suggesting not all Nazis are bad people. Again, it's just a total fabrication. It's a useful political talking point to undermine Trump's credibility, and it's just a lie. Are you comfortable being lied to? That's a question only you can answer for yourself. You know, that's as far as we're going to go. I have to call out hypocrisy, and I have to call out, not hypocrisy, deceptive editing, lying through omission. We've talked a little bit about how this whole thing stems from Donald Trump talking about poisoning the blood of our country and how that's terrible from a certain point of view. If you compare it to Hitler and you think he means the same thing as Hitler. And we dug into the Snopes article and we went through in detail where it talks about other possible things that he's talking about, because the way Donald Trump phrases his sentence, it's vague. It's poor speech. It's poorly disciplined speech that it's vague and therefore can be taken out of context. As a politician, he should probably be a more gifted communicator. But he's got a bigger following than I do, so who am I to preach to him about effectiveness? Donald Trump claims, here we go, they're poisoning the blood of our country. This is so terrible. This is the clip that's part of this article. Let's watch.
All over the world, not just in South country. When they do that, we got a lot of work.
Gotta get it. Let's hear the whole clip right from the beginning.
Country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in. And the crime is going to be tremendous. The terrorism is going to be, and we built a tremendous piece of.
If you just look at this 30-second clip, just this specifically, it sounds like at the end, he's saying they are pouring into our country, meaning immigrants. And at the beginning, he says they're poisoning the blood of our country, the blood of the country. So you can be forgiven for assuming that he's the antecedent to they. What they refers to is the immigrants pouring into our country. Except, let's offer the benefit of context. Again, you've heard the quote, Donald Trump said there were very fine people on both sides of Charlottesville, thereby making the argument that he must have meant the neo-Nazis were fine. Okay? I just showed you. By listening to 30 seconds on either side, you can see where he offers an explicit disclaimer, not the neo-Nazis. That's not who I mean when I say very fine people. He couldn't have been more clear. But if you cut out the disclaimer, suddenly the context is different. Let's ask ourselves, why did this clip start mid-sentence? Listen to how it starts again. It's not the beginning of a thought.
To the wall, and then we
listen carefully.
Country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do.
Mid-paragraph, practically mid-sentence. Like, why did they start here? Is it possible that there's something he said before the start of this clip that might change the context? Let's find out. I went and found it for you.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work.
When they let 15 or 16 million people into our country, who is they? The immigrants aren't letting immigrants into our country. Who is they? Pretty sure he means Democrats. At a minimum, he means the swamp creatures on both sides, left and right, Democrat and Republican, that benefit politically and personally from mass illegal immigration for a variety of reasons. You can make a lot of money off the poor. This sentence implies, this sentence shows he's using the word they to mean American politicians setting policy that enables mass illegal immigration.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country. When they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country.
The very next sentence, they're poisoning the blood of our country. That sentence, to me, clearly applies to the politicians who are enabling mass immigration. In other words, he is using this rhetoric to say the politicians setting policy are damaging our country by destroying the rule of law. And as we've looked at in other places, he objects to things like disease coming across our borders. That's what happens with uncontrolled mass immigration, with drugs flowing into our countries. And the reason why we can point out right in Snopes. In fact, let's go back there and hit the highlights again because we're making a specific claim. Here's Snopes. I have it pulled up. All of the problems, the single biggest problem is heroin that pours across our southern border. So he's identifying the area and he's identifying the issue, drugs coming into America. It's just pouring in and destroying their youth. It's poisoning the blood of their youth and plenty of other people. Donald Trump is personally anti-drug. He's personally very careful what he puts in his body as regards to drugs. He's not a recreational drug user. He doesn't support it. He is a teetotaler, from what I understand. Doesn't drink alcohol even. He doesn't like drugs. And he certainly doesn't like illegal drugs flowing into our country. But why would he say poisoning the blood of their youth? Not American youth, not our youth, their youth. Well, if this is the southern border, and he's saying their youth, it stands to reason he's talking about the countries where the drugs are pouring from, who happen to be populated primarily by brown people. Not that I care about that, but y'all are fixated on it. So why is he expressing sympathy, using the exact same rhetoric, poisoning the blood, and referring to the youth of other countries who are dealing with this? Because his problem is the drugs, not the race of the immigrants. It's as clear as day if you're willing to just look at a little context, but it doesn't fit the narrative. Let's see what Reddit has to say. Regular people responding to this narrative. Again, not responding to the context and the facts, responding to the carefully twisted words used to convey a meaning that is not truth. It's terrifying how readily people support this. I've got MAGA relatives. Their first response is to deny. They say, no, Trump would never do or say those things. So, yeah, they're saying, no, Trump isn't Hitler. He didn't echo Hitler. So then you've got to bring the receipts, show them the clips and the posts. Well, if you show them carefully edited clips and posts, then you're taking him out of context. And then they move from Trump didn't say that to say, well, yeah, but he's right, which could mean the same thing we've argued tonight. They might say, that's missing context. That's misconstrued. That's a lie. He didn't say that. He didn't mean that. He clarified. This was his clarification. But all you hear is, yeah, that's just right. That's what really scares me, how quickly they accept whatever he says. They'll stick with him no matter how far off the deep end he goes. They do this because they don't want to admit they are wrong. Being wrong is weak and it hurts their fragile ego. They feel the world is rejecting them and Trump is their only solace. Indeed, and if you provide them totally undeniable proof of Republican corruption and ugliness, they'll simply throw up their hands and retreat to the coward's position of, well, they're all corrupt. Because if they're all corrupt, it means no Republican ever has to feel bad or think they made the wrong choice. Total avoidance of any accountability is the overriding right-wing mandate. That's a terribly sad way of looking at the world. But let's look at what they're actually saying. Let's say you have totally undeniable proof of Republican corruption and ugliness. That's bad. You know what I think you should do in that case? You should impeach that person and put them in prison. I think corruption is bad. Call me old-fashioned. I don't like it. I guess maybe this is why I'm not a Republican, because I won't vote party line and I won't blindly, I will not blindly throw my loyalty to a person just because of the party they're associated with and overlook their faults. You know who does? A lot of Democrats. I mean, half the country, one way or the other, is associated with Democrat or Republican. So the question is, if I say I'm willing to throw in prison someone who has evidence of corruption, are you willing to do the same? Because when we talk about evidence of corruption for Hillary Clinton, all the excuses come out, and we're not interested in putting her in prison. If we find evidence of corruption with Joe Biden, with Hunter Biden, the whole Biden clan, nope, that's nothing. It's fine. There's no real evidence there. There's no compelling evidence there. We can ignore that. They can stay in power. Nancy Pelosi. How do you feel about the fact that Nancy Pelosi is worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars? And on the books, she's never done more than earn a salary as a congressperson. How do you accumulate that much wealth from a career in Congress, making a comfortable 6 figures? I don't care who you are, you cannot earn that much wealth from that salary. You have to have another source of income. She does. Her husband manages stock portfolios. And interestingly enough, his wife has the inside track on information about pending regulation, about government actions, about industry shakeups, about whatever. Things that would be really useful if you were trading stocks. It would be good to know, hey, the government's going to move in this direction, and that's going to tilt the scales, so maybe let's move our money over here. I'll throw a Republican in the mix. You know who makes, from a percentage basis, almost as much as Nancy Pelosi in the stock market? Dan Crenshaw. He's a Republican. He's a veteran. Look at him. He's honorable and wonderful, and he, credit to him, he lost an eye in the war. He's injured. I'm grateful for his bravery. I'm grateful for his sacrifice. That does not excuse corruption. If you look at a chart of stock gains by congressperson, you have Nancy Pelosi, and just behind her, Dan Crenshaw. So, what if I respond to you, Mr. Redditor, and I say, hey, guess what? I do think there's a lot of corruption, and I don't care if it's right or left. Impeach him and put him in prison. But you're not going to go there with me. You have no interest in pursuing leftist corruption because that's useful to you. But to prove I'm not BSing, I'm going to go find that chart. 2 minutes of Googling, and look what we have. Members of Congress that beat the S&P 500, the tracking index fund SPY, in 2021. You know, the year where the government was mucking around the economy a bunch. You know, COVID regulations, shutting things down, starting them back up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of a messy year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Top 5 are all Republicans. I would want to take a good hard look at their behavior. And if you can prove corruption, impeach them and put them in prison. We cannot allow corruption. It's pretty straightforward. Call me crazy. And would you look at that? My memory served me well, except I was a little wrong. Dan Crenshaw did a little better. Dan Crenshaw, Nancy Pelosi, neck and neck, making, there's the S&P. So there's no numbers here, but call it 2.5 times what the market did that year. Do you know, I don't know if you ever looked at it, there are no professional traders, highly regulated industry, people who do this for a living, pay attention to the details, try and beat the market. There are none of them that consistently do this well. What do you want to bet that if we go back year over year, you'll see that they beat the market pretty consistently? What do you think? You think that's possible? I think that's possible. My name is Nathan Lindorf. This is The Rational Independent. This was my Reddit rant today. Good luck out there.